Earl Tennant was a cattle farmer in Parkersburg, West Virginia. In 1998, he picked up his camcorder and walked to the edge of his property. He wasn't making a home movie. He pointed the lens at the creek running through his pasture. The water was foaming, bubbling, and in certain angles of light, it was glowing. Not reflecting, glowing, a sickening neon green. Then he turned the camera on his cows. These weren't sick animals. Sick you can deal with. These were wrong. They were charging at him like wild animals, creatures he'd raised from calves. Their eyes had turned cloudy, white and opaque. Blood was running from their noses, from their mouths, and when they died and he opened them up, their internal organs had turned the same color as that creek, bright green. And their teeth, every single tooth in their heads, had gone jet black. Earl burned 153 of his cows in a bonfire on his own land. He knew who did it. Just up the river sat the Washington Works plant, one of the largest factories in West Virginia, owned by one of the most powerful chemical companies in American history, DuPont. Earl told anyone who would listen that DuPont was poisoning his water. DuPont's response was to call him a poor farmer who didn't know how to raise cattle. But Earl was right. For 40 years, DuPont had been dumping a chemical into that water that their own scientists had flagged as dangerous since 1961. A chemical so durable that the human body cannot break it down. A chemical that, by the time Earl was standing at that creek with his camcorder, had already spread to every corner of the planet. It is in the blood of 99% of people alive today. It is almost certainly in yours. I'm James Tudor. This is the file on the Devil's Frying Pan. To understand how we got here, you have to go back to the American kitchen in the 1950s. DuPont launched Teflon, and it genuinely felt like magic. You could fry an egg, and it would slide clean off the pan. No butter, no oil, no scrubbing. Space-age technology sitting on your stovetop. Teflon became one of the most successful consumer products in American history, a symbol of the modern, convenient post-war life. But to make Teflon, DuPont needed a specific ingredient. It was called PFOA. The workers on the factory floor called it C8. It was a synthetic chain of carbon and fluorine atoms, and the bond between those atoms is one of the strongest in all of chemistry. So strong that nature has no way to break it down. Once C8 exists, it just stays. On the land, in the water, in the body. That's why scientists call it a forever chemical. It doesn't go away, ever. DuPont bought C8 from 3M, and almost immediately, something came back that should have stopped everything. In 1961, 4 decades before Earl's cows started dying, DuPont's own toxicologists ran tests on rats. Small doses of C8 were enlarging their livers. The chief of toxicology wrote it up in plain language. The chemical should be handled with extreme care, and skin contact should be strictly avoided. DuPont read the report. They understood what it said. Then they filed it away, kept the factory running, and said nothing, because Teflon was generating $1 billion a year. And $1 billion has a way of making internal memos disappear. By 1962, DuPont wanted to know exactly what C8 fumes did to human lungs. They didn't have the computer modeling we have today, so they found another way. They asked volunteers to smoke cigarettes. Not regular cigarettes, cigarettes that DuPont scientists had laced with C8. 9 out of 10 people in the highest dose group got sick almost immediately. Violent shaking chills, high fevers, chest tightening. It became known around the factory as polymer fume fever, or just the Teflon flu, a chemical reaction in the lungs triggered by inhaling burning C8. DuPont now had it documented on human subjects in their own handwriting. This chemical makes people sick. They didn't warn the public. They didn't put anything on the packaging. They stamped the report confidential, put it in a cabinet, and kept the factory running around the clock. I want you to hold that detail for a second. They ran the experiment. They got the result, and then they hid it. That's not negligence. That's a decision. In 1981, DuPont's supplier, 3M, sent them an urgent warning. Their latest rat studies showed that C8 exposure was causing eye defects in unborn fetuses. DuPont's response was not to stop. It was to watch. They quietly identified 8 pregnant women working in their Teflon division. They didn't tell these women anything, didn't explain why they were being monitored, just observed, took notes, waited. 2 of the 8 babies were born with defects. That's 25%. One of them was a boy named Bucky Bailey. He came into the world with a single nostril and a deformed eyelid, tissue growing in a jagged serrated pattern across his eye. It looked almost identical to the defects from the rat studies, the same defects that 3M had just warned DuPont about. DuPont saw this. They recorded it. And then they moved the female workers out of that division and buried the file. Bucky Bailey's mother was never told. Not what she'd been exposed to. Not what it might have done. Nothing. Bucky grew up having surgery after surgery, never knowing that his pain had been observed, documented, and quietly set aside because it was inconvenient for a product line. That is the part of this story that is hardest to sit with. Earl Tennant couldn't get anyone to move. The EPA looked the other way. Local politicians weren't interested. So he called a lawyer named Rob Bilott. Bilott was not the obvious choice for this fight. He was a corporate defense attorney. His whole career had been spent on the other side of cases like this, defending chemical companies. But he watched Earl's camcorder footage. He saw the cows, he saw the creek, and he took the case. He filed suit and used the discovery process to force DuPont to hand over their internal documents. He expected a few boxes of paperwork. DuPont sent him 110,000 pages. It was a classic document dump. Bury the lawyer in paper and wait for him to give up. Instead, Bilott sat on the floor of his office, surrounded by stacks that reached the ceiling, and read every single page. He found the 1961 liver toxicity report. He found the 1962 cigarette experiment. He found the 1981 birth defect study. And he found internal correspondence where DuPont executives had debated dumping C8 into the ocean before deciding it was simply cheaper to dump it in the river. But the most chilling documents were the ones about the local water supply. DuPont had secretly tested the tap water in schools and businesses throughout the area. They knew exactly how contaminated it was, and when they discovered that a nearby district called Little Hocking had dangerously high levels of C8 in its water, they didn't alert anyone. They quietly purchased the local water rights to keep the evidence buried. Bilott realized this wasn't a case about one farmer's cows anymore. Bilott sued DuPont on behalf of 70,000 residents of Parkersburg. As part of the eventual settlement, a science panel was established to test local blood and track health outcomes over years. The results linked C8 exposure to 6 diseases: kidney cancer, testicular cancer, thyroid disease, ulcerative colitis, high cholesterol, and preeclampsia. But the detail that should stop you cold is this: to do the study properly, the scientists needed a control group. They needed blood samples with no C8, clean blood to compare against the contaminated samples. Standard procedure. They couldn't find any. They searched blood banks across the country. Nothing. C8 had spread so completely, through water systems, through air, through decades of consumer products, that by the year 2000, it was detectable in virtually every human being on Earth. To find uncontaminated blood, the scientist had to go to medical archives from the Korean War, preserved samples from 1950, before Teflon existed. That was the only clean blood left. DuPont had been manufacturing C8 for 50 years. In that time, without any public announcement, without any vote, without anyone's consent, they had put it in all of us. In 2017, DuPont settled for $671 million. It sounds significant, but DuPont had made billions from Teflon over 50 years. The settlement was, in their own accounting, the cost of doing business. C8 is now banned, and if you go buy a non-stick pan today, the label will say PFOA free, so the problem's solved. Except that chemical companies replaced C8 with a new compound called GenX. It has a nearly identical molecular structure, and the early rat studies on GenX are showing liver damage, kidney damage, and cancer. The industry looked at everything that happened, everything that came out in those 110,000 pages, and their response was to change the name of the chemical. Earl Tennant died of cancer before any of this reached a courtroom. He never got his day. Rob Bilott is still fighting. He has been fighting for over 20 years. His story was turned into a film, Dark Waters, because sometimes the truth is so strange that people assume it must be fiction. And that non-stick pan in your kitchen, it is the most successful cover-up in the history of consumer products. The evidence was there in 1961. The decision to hide it was made before most of the victims were even born. I'm James Tudor. This is Empire Archives. Subscribe.